This is a brief overview of Chapter 3 on global diversity, specifically about a few elements about the global environment and then also about diversity. This first slide is just to go a little bit back to business ethics and some of the scenarios that you might see on an exam. In this particular situation, we're using the three-step checklist, so you can see the 3 questions there that helps us gather information about how to make a good ethical decision. So in this situation, Tom Peters made a telephone call that was monitored by his employer and made a personal call about his weekend activities. So when we think through the questions, this situation may not violate any laws, but we could probably agree that it violates professional standards for customer service representatives. And then we can also think through when we think about who is affected by Tom's actions, we could say that Tom himself could be impacted because he may be reprimanded for his behavior. His manager may not trust Tom going forward, and you might have a customer who wanted to get through to the organization and was not able to because Tom was on the telephone. So in this situation, you might get the scenario on an exam and be asked to use one of the decision-making models that we discussed in our book and in class to be able to give the right kind of ethical process to think through how to make that decision and show your rationale for your final result. Moving on, so far we've talked about two different types of environments, and this moves us into the third. We've talked about the internal environment, which was primarily culture and thinking about the management style, how we turn our inputs into outputs, and now we're kind of moving into what is part of our external environment. Our external environment is anything that impacts our organizational performance from outside the organization. So anything from the government to your customers, to your suppliers, to the economy. So there's lots of things that impact the organization from outside, and the global environment is the environment that we do operate in now because of how small the world has actually gotten because of being able to operate in a global business environment. So let's just say we have a maple syrup company out of Vermont. They have the ability to compete internationally because of what we have, the options that we have. So there are a couple of different attitudes that we can take when we look at operating in a global environment. The first one is an ethnocentric attitude where it just says we, our own ethnic group or culture is superior, and that when we take that into the business environment, that means that we may not trust the employees from that country to make the best decisions for the organization. So it's kind of that we know what we're doing and this is the way we're going to do it. And that's not the most effective approach in most situations, if not all. A polycentric attitude would say, we're operating in another country and those employees in that country know the best way to operate and how to communicate and how to get things done. So it's sort of a you figure it out kind of mentality instead of the geocentric attitude, which is where we would like to be, where we say, what's the best approach in this situation? We know that there are different individuals with different approaches depending on what background they come from and what culture they come from. And perhaps we can take a combination of those approaches and truly have the best approach instead of what might be considered one particular way to do things. There's a couple of different types of global companies, so I want to touch on 3. The first one is an international business, and this would be that maple syrup company that perhaps is based in Vermont but transacts business in other countries. So perhaps they sell their maple syrup in all different parts of the world. A multinational corporation would have significant operations in more than one country. So instead of just having all of their headquarters just in Vermont, perhaps they find out that it is beneficial for them to have a headquarters in Norway and perhaps produce maple syrup there as well. So that would be a multinational corporation where now they've got operations in more than one. The third type of organization is a transnational organization, and this is where this happens more with much larger organizations, where instead of having a North American region and perhaps an Asia Pacific region or European region, you might reorganize based on function or structure or perhaps industry groups. So you might have global research and development component to your business or a global marketing instead of being I'm a marketing person specifically for North America. And this gives the ability to work across cultures to find that best approach and have that geocentric attitude towards how they do their work. There are plenty of different ways that organizations can go global. So thinking through a couple of those here. The first way, and we'll just use our maple syrup company just as a reference point, but the first one is global sourcing, and this is where it's also can be called outsourcing or offshoring, where you say, where in the world can I find the best resources to get the job done? Now, this obviously infringes on some ethical questions where we think about just because we can do something more cheaply in another part of the world, does that mean we should? And are the individuals that are completing those tasks being treated fairly in that part of the world? So, but this is one way that organizations can look for the best deals to save money and hopefully benefit everyone involved. Unfortunately, there are many situations where outsourcing may not benefit everyone involved in that situation, whether it's in underpaying individuals that are working in those countries and perhaps taking work away from the United States. So that could be another way to look at that. Importing and exporting is simply just buying and selling those products from foreign buyers or sellers. Licensing and franchising is kind of an interesting global approach. So when we think about licensing, it's where one company says, okay, you can use our name, you can use our brand, you can use our technology for a royalty, you have to pay something, and then you get to use it on your product. And I like to think about the Disney princesses with licensing because Disney does not make everything that has a Disney princess on it. There's everything from sheets to dishes, to toothbrushes, to nightgowns, to anything you can imagine. And what they will do is they license out those likenesses so that that company can make their product and have it be attractive to 6-year-old girls, but then also Disney gets some benefit out of that too. Franchising is the other approach where you would license the entire business to a franchisee for a fee and then ongoing royalties. The benefit to this is you do get some guidelines, you also get access to advertising, and that creates some consistency across the brand. It also makes it a more familiar organization to then maybe start. So think of a McDonald's or a Dunkin' Donuts where you may not want to go to Rachel's Burger Shop on the corner, but McDonald's is a little bit more familiar, so you might be more likely to want to invest in something that's known. Looking briefly at joint ventures and strategic alliances. Joint ventures is when two companies share ownership of a brand new enterprise, which is great when you have resources and human capital to be able to bring those together. However, the bad side is you lose some control over that business and how it's run because you are now partnering with another organization. Also, there's some definite challenges when trying to put two organizations together because now you're not only merging two organizational cultures, but you're also perhaps trying to integrate two countries' cultures. And there's some definite challenges that go along with that. The other approach you can take is to be in a strategic alliance, and that's an agreement where you say we're going to share resources, but we're not going to create a whole new company. So we're going to put in some capital, put in some resources to maybe sell products and services in another country. Maybe, and this, I think the easiest example I think of with this is a dual degree program. So if you went down, you take some classes at Aquinas, you take some classes at Cornerstone, you come together to share resources, but you end up with your degree. So that's a way we can think about a strategic alliance there. So moving on to some discussion about diversity and how important it is. It's not something that organizations can ignore. First, because of the growth of just the level of diversity, because of international businesses being able to compete on a global scale, but then also just the level of diversity that has grown here in the United States, which is great. It's amazing to be able to see just the different perspectives that we are able to have speak into the success of our organizations. So diversity is definitely a beneficial thing, but you can't just assume that it's going to go well. You have to be purposeful about it. So diversity, when we think about, and these are just kind of four big buckets, you can have some diversity or some challenges with diversity when it comes to age. I remember being a brand new manager right out of college, and I had to manage some tellers, bank tellers, that were 25, 30 years older than me, and just the challenges of how differently we communicated and different things that were important to us and different priorities, and just being able to figure out the best way to work together, and that we both had to see that we brought benefits to that relationship. And so there can be some challenges there. When we think about gender and race and ethnicity, there have been some barriers that have been in place in the workplace for women and for those that are minority, and just thinking through some of those challenges that we need to be aware that they may still exist, and some ways of treating others that still provide social barriers to those to advancement opportunities, and just thinking through the benefits that having that diversity brings is just really, really important. And when we think through thinking about our coworkers and our employees as those that have value and worth, it brings that into play as well. Looking briefly at a couple of terms that come into thinking through diversity, obviously discrimination is not what we want to do, because we want to make sure that everyone has the same treatment in employment decisions. So over history, we've had times where affirmative action has been used to create those employment opportunities. And I think the important point when we think through affirmative action, at least from my perspective, is that we're not there to make sure that there is an equal number of each gender or each minority group in that workplace, but we're truly looking for ways to create opportunities, equal opportunities, so that we're not looking for, that we're not preventing certain groups of people from even having the ability to apply or to be promoted from inside an organization. So affirmative action is used very, very specifically for specific periods of time, specific groups of people, and usually in specific industries, and really has only been used in select times to say that, yes, there have been barriers in this situation for minorities and women, and how can we rectify that? How can we make sure that they're getting equal opportunities there? But the other side, just thinking through the benefits instead of just the impact, just the benefits of diversity in our workplaces. And I think this can help us to hopefully embrace the diversity in our workplaces, and make sure that we're not prohibiting those voices from being heard. So improved decision making. Research has shown that when you have a more diverse group around the table, you may have a little bit more conflict, but as a result, your decision making the result ends up to mean better. This also comes into play with having innovation that is greatly improved as a result of having a diverse voice in the room. And that kind of goes along with point number 3, where you're able to share the voice of different groups of people because they're present. And this is very much the case when we think about the level of diversity at the top of organizations and how that has a long way to go. There are very few minorities, there are very few women at the board of director level. And if we have those people present at the top of organizations, then they can be that force for change throughout that industry and throughout that organization. So just the importance of that. It starts to spread. And we've seen that even in other countries, that the more you have equality at the top of organizations, that overflows into lower levels as well. And it also allows for stronger monitoring roles in organizations as well. And this comes up to play when you're thinking about corporate responsibility and also environmental issues, and just being willing to look for ways to take care of the world that is around us. So this is just a brief recap of Chapter 3, looking at diversity and then also some of the global approaches that are relevant for our topic of management. Obviously, if you have more interest in international business, we have a whole major of international business, and then more detail is obviously explored in those classes.